There's three of you. There's the body, physical body, then there's the psychological entity, the mental emotional body, and then there's the spiritual dimension or body that connects you to the vastness of spirit. Everybody is mostly invisible. The most important part of you, which is the psychological entity, but that's the most important part in this dimension, is invisible to the senses. The body is visible to the senses, the physical body, but you are not, you are beyond the physical body, you are some entity that is not visible, although there's a connection between the mental emotional entity and the physicality of the body, especially with the brain, but the entire body too, there's a connection. But the fact is that nobody in the physical realm, nobody could, if somebody were looking for you in the physical realm, hoping to find some evidence that you exist as a person, they wouldn't find you. Example would be a surgeon looking in your brain, hopefully not, but trying to find you and all the memories that make up ultimately the person. All the stuff that's there, is that in the brain? Is it elsewhere? Does the brain just transmit it? But whatever the surgeon does, he's not going to find you. There's no evidence of the person. I sometimes give as an example, there are countless, hundreds of thousands, millions of memories within you somewhere. Where do they live and in what form? Are they accessible to the senses? No, because even the most powerful microscope, if a surgeon uses it and looks at your brain, he is not going to find your grandmother. But your grandmother, the memory of your grandmother is there, undoubtedly. But in what form does the memory of your grandmother survive in the brain? Neurons, they say, yeah, but still, how does the neuron become your grandmother? And countless memories that are there, we only need to focus on it. Well, one only needs to ask a question. The bed that you slept in when you were a child, okay, suddenly the memory is there. The door to your house when you were a child, or the door to your room, suddenly there's a memory of opening that. It lived somewhere, but nobody could ever find it in the sensory realm. So it's a mystery. Nobody really knows what a thought is, but there is a link between the brain and the invisible realm. There is a link in the same way that there's a link between the radio and the music that the radio plays. And if something goes wrong with the radio, then the music is no longer, doesn't sound very good anymore, or becomes, little faults appear, and in the end it might break down completely. And so suddenly the radio has gone rusty, and the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven begins to collapse that it was playing. But it never produced it, nor was it even stored there. This is just a little analogy. But it's interesting to note and to realize that you are essentially invisible. And that's only not even talking yet about the deeper dimension of who you are. Even in the psychological realm, the psychological mental emotional entity is an invisible being. Does it even live in this dimension? Or does it live in some other dimension and just comes temporarily in this dimension? These are all interesting questions. We don't want to go too far into that kind of speculative investigation, but it's undoubtedly helpful to realize that you are essentially an invisible entity. Now, you can gain some knowledge about the invisible entity by observing certain things in the physical realm, facial expressions, how a person behaves, what a person says. You can draw some conclusions as to their invisible makeup. So what the person is, the conditioning of the mind and the emotional field. Yes, you can observe a person's behavior, speech, and so on, and then you know quite a bit about them. So it can manifest through the body, but the memories, you don't know that until somebody talks about it. And then you go deeper, and there is that which is beyond the mind and the emotions. And most humans are unconscious of that dimension. And that's the most essential thing, is to recognize that dimension within yourself, not believe in it, but to sense it here and now. When the mind becomes still and emotions also subside, and then suddenly something opens up. And that's where you are a spiritual being, but not separate from the being of the universe. Just maybe one could say you're a ray of consciousness that emanates from the source of all life. And just as light emanates from the sun, and just as the ray of sunlight is connected to the sun, one could even say is the sun, or certainly emanates from the sun. I would suggest that the consciousness emanates from the source of all consciousness, of all life. And so at the deepest level, you're not a separate entity entirely, but you're eternally connected to the source. And the source then manifests. It eventually becomes, as a mental, emotional, and the physical, it takes on a form, temporary form, then the form becomes a body. And then the body comes to an end at some point, and then I would suggest that the invisible mental emotional entity does not necessarily come to an end. That form, which is not in the physical realm, but it's still form, the psychological physical entity with all its conditioning, is still there somewhere. And it does all kinds of things then. We don't need to go into the astral dimension or wherever it goes. And then at some point, it has more work, more development, more evolution to do, and assumes another physicality. It's driven to it. It wants to experience more of this dimension. There's a driving force behind it, the compulsion to reincarnate, the thirst for sensory experience. I need more of it. And I need more drama too. It's the ego. I want more. And you can't help it. You're pulled.